We are human, we are animals, we crave the ability to be we. I know it's called me undies. We undies might have sounded differently, right?
Is it a disco now?
Yeah, it's an after party, so it's now we go with the flash.
My goal in life is to be a laptop sticker.
Me too.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.
It's a great honor, Mr. Jaffe. It's always nice to be with you.
I'm so happy to be with you. I'm honored.
Thanks for doing this, too. It's a real service to the community.
Thank you for doing this, Joseph, for doing CoronaTV in general. And it's your gift to the universe, and it's appreciated.
Very human, and I like that.
Look at you! You are insane!
How did I do that?
You're insane!
Well, welcome everybody. We are going for lunch, brunch, dinner to Augie and Ray's today. So hopefully you're hungry, because I'm not going to be feeding your stomach today. I'm actually going to be feeding your mind. I'm going to be feeding your soul, and more importantly, Augie is going to be feeding it. I'm just the server. He is the main course, if you will. It's going to be a great day. We have so many amazing topics to discuss, and I can't wait to discuss them. But first, a bit of an announcement. So against my better judgment, on Monday night, Bob Farnham, Scott Monty, Ted Rubin, and maybe a few special guests, we're going to be getting together via StreamYard for a 2 hour, 15-minute, somewhat of a marathon watch party of the RNC. And I'm going to be streaming that live on Facebook, and I guess my guests are going to be sharing it as well. If you feel like watching with us, commenting on the RNC, the Republican National Convention, who knows, maybe you can even join the show as well. I want to be clear about a few things. We would have actually done it this week with the DNC, with the Democratic National Convention, but the idea itself only was born yesterday, so we're moving quickly on it. For example, hello, Joey. Joey doesn't even know about the idea because, but he's already in. So I don't know whether that means he's going to be watching with us or he's going to want to come on to the show. All I can tell you at this point is there will be a drinking game. And so I expect my stomach to get pumped because I'm choosing the phrase radical left. So it's going to be fun. Look, we're going to try and find some humor, but we're also, I'm going to look for the truth, all right? I'm going to look for, there is truth. There must be truth in everything. And even though the four of us, I would say, either lean slightly to extremely left, or in fact, we have one Republican or maybe ex-Republican, we're going to try and just create a bit of entertainment and a bit of insight as well. So we hope you will join us. I'm glad Bob thinks it's a great idea because he's a part of it too. So that is Monday. It's not a CoronaTV episode, but it is going to be on my Facebook page. So we'll leave it at that. Today is National Senior Citizens Day. So it's a good opportunity for me to say hi to my mom, who's watching. How disrespectful is that? Look how youthful and amazing she looks. And it also has nothing to do with the fact that Augie Ray is my guest today. He is smiling in the background. Is that a middle finger I see? I'm not really sure. But Augie is a VP and analyst at Gartner. I mean, I've never seen someone with a title that really just does not describe what a really smart, intelligent, insightful man he is. And he's going to be on the show shortly. And, you know, as always, if you want to get a sense as who's coming up next week on the show, all you got to do is subscribe to my newsletter or text the word CoronaTV to 66866. But I'll give you a sneak preview. It's an incredible week next week, and I just have to call out, I'm still hoping that it just works out the way I hope, but James Rollins, one of my favorite authors, maybe my favorite author, is going to be my guest on Wednesday. So we've got Jory Kelvin, Joe and Jim and James. It's, it's all the J's. Maybe I should replace Calvin with someone whose name begins with a J, and Joseph. So it all works out, doesn't it? On Facebook, happy birthday to Avi Shane, to Julian Rabinovitz, to Martin Albarda, my fellow author on my fourth book, Zero, who's also going to be a guest on the show. And a special shout out to Pam Katz. I knew her as Pam Stein or Pam Stein, and now that's how long I've known her, more than 10 years ago. In fact, 15 years ago when I was in the agency world, Pam Stein worked at United Airlines. She was in marketing at the time. But today she's a registered nurse. She's an RN. And she was on the front lines at the worst of COVID hitting the state of Illinois and Chicago. And she is a modern day hero. She is not an essential worker. She's an essential human being. And I just want to not only wish her happy birthday, but thank her for her service and everything she did during the time when things were so uncertain and so unclear and so confusing and so scary. And she was showing up to work each and every day. And then, of course, I want to say, I know it's downhill from there, but that doesn't mean I love my LinkedIn contacts any less. Happy birthday to you. Well, it's now time for our seated soliloquy. And the seated soliloquy is squarely in the camp of my guest, Augie Ray, and what we're going to be discussing today. And the topic is called unfounded optimism. And you'll see what I mean based on the soliloquy, but also based on the discussion. Now, if you haven't heard about extroverted introverts, then you will on an upcoming episode of CoronaTV, where I'm actually going to talk to an expert on the subject. Today, I want to introduce a new idea, which has partly been inspired by my guest today. The notion of pessimistic optimists, or its corollary, optimistic pessimists. If it sounds like a contradiction or oxymoron of sorts, then I guess it should. The thought came from the concept of unfounded optimism. In the corporate world, you may be familiar with the unfortunate success theater that was prevalent during Jeffrey Immelt's reign at GE, and how that led to declining fortunes for a company that was apparently built to suck. No one was allowed to bring bad news. No one. Today, we see it rife among our political leaders, choosing unsupported optimism over unbiased realism and just telling it like it is to a populace desperate for data, facts, and, well, honesty. Even in our personal lives, as parents, for example, we choose to keep the bad news away from our kids, to protect them, to spare them from the pain and harshness of what we have to endure on a daily basis. But are we in fact protecting them, or in fact are we harming them? Perhaps not today, but certainly down the road. Hope for the best, plan for the worst might be one way we reconcile the seemingly contradictory phase, although my riff on this is plan for the best, plan for the worst. Screw hope. Hope is not a strategy. Strategy is a strategy. Now, don't get me wrong. We need to be optimistic. In fact, we have to be optimistic. Without optimism, the world would be even lonelier and scarier than it already is. We should, however, temper unbridled or unfettered optimism with a counterbalance of realism and pragmatism. That's what will allow us to continue to look and reach towards the stars, but keep us grounded at the same time. Now it's time to bring on a man who might be dispelling and pushing back on the very nature of what the show is about, Augie Ray, because I find him to be, quite frankly, a pragmatist and a realist, but he's an optimist as well. Augie is VP and analyst at Gartner, where he advises marketers on customer experience best practices. He has over 2 decades of experience in digital marketing, social media, and customer experience, including time at some companies known for their strong customer experience, including USAA and American Express. I met him when he was at Forrester. I regard him as truly one of the gurus of customer experience. And, you know, USAA was profiled in my book, Flip the Funnel, as one of the best-in-class examples of what it takes to be what I call now customer obsessed. So without further ado, I am obsessed on Augie Ray. Welcome to the show, Augie.
Hi, Joe. Thank you so much for having me on. I feel like you've maybe built me up a little too much. You said I was a steak. I think maybe I'm more an appetizer, but I'm happy to be here.
As long as you don't give us food poisoning, you know, or reflux, because God knows there's enough stuff today that does make our stomachs turn and churn, no doubt, right?
Yes.
So it's first of all, how are you?
I am well. I am an extrovert who loves and an urbanite who loves urban experiences, and all of this staying home and, you know, restaurants being closed or limited has been a real difference in my lifestyle. And looking at the forward in the future at the fact that, you know, some of it may take some time to come back. I saw a Yelp survey a week or two ago that said that 60% of the restaurants that are closed think that they are closed permanently. So I look around my neighborhood at the things I value, the things I appreciate, and doing my best to support them in whatever way I can. So it's been, you know, like for everyone, we've all got our stories of what makes it difficult, but my wife and I are doing well and getting through it, and I hope all of your listeners are as well.
As do I. Well, we know that Seth must be an optimist because he said happy Friday. So maybe that means he's happy. And Steve Garfield said, I am an optimist, but I've realized that I need to temper that with pessimism. Or maybe, Steve, it's pragmatism, right? But it's hard for me to do. So Augie, before we get into some fun facts about you, have you ever been to the original Augie and Ray's?
I have not, actually. I certainly know it exists and see it. I hope someday to get there.
I mean, I think it would be great if you walk in. You say, "My name is Augie Ray." Do you think that they should give you a free meal or a coffee, or I don't know, a side order of home fries?
It's a small business. I'm more than happy to pay my own way and to get my picture taken. Although I could, I guess, just do it with a green screen like you are.
What do you mean? No, I'm actually there. That's the difference. I mean, come on, don't ruin the theater of the mind. All right, so let's get into some fun facts about you. And there are a couple of interesting things that I learned about you. So this is a really interesting one. You married your high school sweetheart and had a love letter that you wrote to your wife, published in a book called Love Letters of a Lifetime: Romance in America. So when did you become such a romantic?
I've always been romantic, actually. My wife will joke that I'm more romantic than she is. I'm the kind of guy who cries at movies much more so than my wife does. So I'm kind of an emotional, romantic guy. The story of how this came to happen is interesting, and that my wife and I, before there was a real big business around Disney weddings, my wife and I renewed our vows in Disney World. I had a website to might be our next topic that we talk about fun facts, and it talked about this renewal ceremony. And as a result, the publisher reached out and said, "Hey, do you have any love letters? We're publishing this book." And I happened to have one that I wrote to my wife on our wedding day, and it got published in the book as a result.
And now she reminds you of it every single day about all the promises you made that you haven't given. I'm kidding. But it's funny because it actually speaks to the next fun fact about you, which I a little bit of Photoshop as well. And I find this amazing because I see that there are two common threads, right? Which is your interests, your passions, your expressions. By putting them out there, by publishing them, people, I mean, this is the original promise of social media, right? That someone would be paying attention and recognizing and rewarding you. So back to, I didn't realize the tie-in with Disney with respect to renewing your vows or your vows. But in the early days of the internet, being now that, of course, now I realize you're a Disney fan. You had a website that got so much attention, you were invited down to Disney World for the original, for the opening celebrations of the 25th anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
And I think where it gets interesting is that, and I didn't know this either, that it proved to be somewhat of a controversial activation for them. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about, start at the beginning, right? You set up a website. First of all, why are you so obsessed with Disney? That sounds weird.
Well, it's interesting. Disney has had a really profound impact on my life, even though I've never really worked there. Now, all that being said, I was a cast member at a Disney store for a season, and I did that. That wasn't what activated me. What happened was I was a professional working at a 9-to-5 job. I loved Disney. I had aspired to work there someday. And so I thought, hey, this is my way to experience it from the inside. So this is back in the days of 3-piece suits. I work the day in my 3-piece suit, drive to the mall, put on my Mickey Mouse leather jacket to be a cast member and help people find the right plush toy. And it was my way of experiencing the company just a little bit from the inside. But it had this really profound impact. Early in my career, like many of us, I left college full of vim and vigor and a strong sort of belief in what customer focus would mean for organizations, and ran headlong into the reality of the way most organizations work. And so I was feeling a little awash and a little directionless, to be honest. And what's interesting is that I'd moved out of my home. Obviously, I'm an adult at this point, although a young adult. And my parents call me and they say, we want to go to Disney World. Your younger brother needs somebody to go on rides with. Will you join us? And I actually said no. I was not a Disney kid. I'd seen some of the movies. They were very nice. And my brother cried and I felt terrible. And so I agreed to go on a family vacation with my younger brother. And it was just this life-changing experience. It was this realization of this customer centricity, of a brand that could execute, of empowering people, of care for the total experience. And it really motivated me. I came back and started learning more and reading more, became an enormous Disney fan. This is sort of pre-internet days. And then when Prodigy first opened up their service to be able to create websites, the very first thing I thought of is, I want to try this, and what do I do it about? Well, let's do it about Disney. And it became a real obsession for about 5 years in the early days of the internet. My website was Lampwick's Guide to Disney, very popular, and it got me on the attention of some people in the public relations group at Disney World. And what was interesting is, because this is 1996, very early days yet, there was not a lot of love for Disney fan sites. There was a feeling inside the organization, I learned, that we were trading on their brand, that we were potentially reducing the value of their brand. And as somebody who understood where the internet was going, or suspected or hoped, and had this customer centricity, that was kind of hard for me to hear, this idea that you could love something so much and help promote it. I used to joke that I was the most uncompensated cog of the Disney marketing machine. I even had calls from Disney lawyers occasionally wanting to know where I got my material from. They thought I was stealing IP, and I'd have to point out, I'm on your mailing list. I'm on your public relations mailing list. They had never heard of it.
And those were the early days, right, of social media, where cease and desist letters generally would accompany, would be the reward for a fan expressing just passion for a brand.
It was. And so, I don't mean to make a short story long, but a PR, senior leader in PR, recognized the value of these fan sites and of mine in particular. And Disney, for its 25th anniversary, was looking for what they called super fans. And typically these were not people with big fan sites. This was a little bit of an influencer strategy, but not the way we think of digital or social influence today. And so what they did is they found people who made 500 visits to Disney World with their family. Those were the super fans. And then they invited me. And when I first heard from this VP, he said, we're including your name. I've got to tell you, this could be a problem. They may say no. There's a lot of controversy about these fan sites that we're seeing. Again, 1996. He made it happen. I went down, had a remarkable experience. I did something that today would be called live blogging. Back then, there were no blog platforms, but I was hauling around a very early and expensive digital camera that took a suitcase, taking pictures of my experiences at the 25th anniversary. And every night I was going back to my room and on a very slow 486 laptop was uploading photos and basically a daily travelogue of my experiences at the 25th anniversary. I had to hand code the pages because there were no tools. So it was just a really interesting experience for me to be a part of this. But as my professional career started catching on, as digital went from being a hobby to a career, I ended up leaving that fan site behind. But I still miss those days.
The one part of the story that I really connect with is I often say that the reason why I became a marketer was because of Coke, because of the concept of brand Coke. That, you know, and it was specifically maybe even a case study that talks about carbonated sugar water, because that's really what it was. Mm-hmm. So much so that the company itself refers to itself as a marketing company, and they put a value on the balance sheet associated with the brand and the brand equity. And I love the fact that your entire career has been informed by seeing a company that is the epitome of quintessential customer obsession, customer experience, customer delight, and how it influenced your life.
It really did. And
it should be like that with everything.
It really did. And what's interesting is that I always joke that this is a right brain, left brain thing. My right brain was being turned into a child, and I just loved the content and the experience. I became an enormous fan, connected with all of the media and entertainment. And the left brain was like, I need to learn about how this company does this. You know, I was feeling so disaffected and disappointed with what I was experiencing in my professional life. I said, I have to learn about this. This interesting thing is I've wanted to be a professional at Disney ever since. I've never been able to make that happen. I think my opportunity for making that happen has probably passed, interestingly enough. But Disney has had a truly profound impact on my direction of my career and then my research and commitment to customer experience.
And of course, you've worked at USAA, you've worked at some of the companies that practice what they preach and even what you preach. So it must be rewarding. And that's probably a good segue, by the way, into the fact that, you know, Augie Ray is not about Augie Ray, right? Augie Ray is about two things: about the company that he keeps or that keeps him, but also about the word, about the content, about, you know, truth in a sense. So, you know, your title today is VP Analyst at Gartner. You know, your URL is not is Gartner.com. What it isn't is AugieRay.com. In fact, if you go to Augie Ray, what you'll realize is the Ray in Augie Ray is in fact Ray-Bans. So you haven't claimed your own website, and why would you? And then that leads to a third part, which I think is a conversation that I want to have with you briefly, which is, you know, when you go to your Twitter profile, you see, you know, opinions are mine. So, but yet you have a profound point of view and an opinion, which is clearly yours. And, you know, the juxtaposition of this, and I'll say this just as a, you know, just for frame of reference, is Tom Goodwin recently was fired, or let's just say left, Publicis, for getting into, I don't know if it was a Twitter war or a LinkedIn war over a couple of comments that he made about COVID. Now, whether you agree with him or not, the question is, was it fair, you know, or not for him to be fired, when in actual fact, I guess the question remains, this is a very roundabout way of asking it, Augie, which is, should people whose profiles say opinions are mine be vilified or criticized or even lauded for anything that might disagree with the populace or maybe with the corporation that keeps him?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly a pressing question. As somebody who has run social media at some Fortune 500 firms and has had a social media presence for, you know, well over 10 years, it's certainly something I've given a lot of consideration to, and I've helped brands understand. The fact I put opinions are mine in my profile doesn't factually, practically protect me from anything, right? Doesn't really protect my employer from anything. It's probably a good thing to at least say, but I don't pretend that those magic 3 words are going to protect me from potentially any implication. I have, in fact, gotten in trouble with employers sometimes for things that I have done in social media. I've been lucky enough to be smart enough to make sure that they're slapped on the wrists and nothing more. But at one company I was at, I wrote a blog post criticizing a sharing economy company for not really being a collaborative company, for being really kind of customer hostile. Well, it turns out that company was in the process of signing a marketing deal with the company I was at, and very large company, and I got a warning that came from the office of the president. This president who didn't even know who I was. I was one tiny cog in his general, in his very large organization, and yet my blog post came to somebody, him or somebody in his office, and I was told, "Hey, let's not do that again." And somebody said something absolutely true, something I know quite well, which is I have to manage my reputation inside my organization, just like I manage my reputation outside. All that being said, what I'll say is that I have what might be thought of as probably a little bit of an edgier, certainly much more political persona, at least on Twitter. What I'd say is that if you follow me on LinkedIn, you will see very little politics. You will probably get hints of my politics, but it's just not an appropriate place. I try to keep things as professional as possible there. On Twitter, I'm me. And so that means if I care about the upcoming election and I care about quality, and I can, you see it in my handle that was there, I will not hesitate from getting into it. Now, all that being said, the thing I want to say, and you mentioned Tom, he's a very interesting guy, but he can be it's not that what he said, I don't think. It is how he responded to the criticism. He was very sharp. I'll tell you a quick story about Tom is that, I don't think he and I know each other well, but we have followed each other. I had great respect for him. I thought he was provocative. I thought he was thoughtful. If I didn't always agree with him, that was okay. But I responded once to him. He asked a question about taxation in a bartering economy, and essentially said, if I rent my house to somebody, but then I rent that somebody else's house, why am I taxed on revenue? And I gave him the factual response. I even gave him a link to the IRS site, and he kind of attacked me, told me I didn't know what I was talking about. It left me with a very bad taste in my mouth. And so this is kind of what he did in this case. He attacked somebody who had a critical comment to him. And so the thing that I urge people to do is to think about not just the content, but the tone, the tenor, the persona you bring to it. I get attacked from time to time on Twitter. I hope I respond generally well. I will tell you, just like any human being, sometimes I get emotional and look back on a response and feel I could have done better. But I really work on taking time to be dispassionate. I work on thanking people for criticism and agreeing to disagree and moving on. I would never attack back. I see too much of that in the world. And I think that's one of the things that we have to think about as we enter this next 2 months where discourse is going to be very sensitive, is that we should be able to express ourselves in respectful ways, in ways that are meant to engage in dialogue. It's how we respond to the people who disagree with us that I think will be the trap that causes some people to get into trouble.
It's very interesting to me because, and by the way, hello to Stephen Rubin who's watching, and Steve Garfield agrees with you. That's what if I had to describe you, and not just in one word, but that word dispassionate, it would be actually level-headed. You're balanced and you don't skew extremes. You sit somewhere with beautiful equilibrium in the middle, and it's that dispassionate approach and response that I think guides you and is your true north. In many respects, even just this conversation so far, from Disney to now, we're talking about maturation. Maybe it's appropriate at Senior Citizens Day because sometimes experience, right? You need to be the silver-haired, executive. You need to be weathered and tenured. To be able to have, you need the battle scars to be able to figure out how to navigate what is sometimes a very bumpy, path filled with obstacles and mines.
Well, we do get into a situation, and I know this wasn't on the agenda, and it could take us down a rabbit hole, but ageism is a serious problem. I kind of, one of my favorite stories in Silicon Valley when I lived there was I consulted with a very large unnamed social media company, and their concern was the reason they wanted me to come in and talk to their folks is that they said that their sales team was not being as effective as one of their competitors, that their competitor's team was talking to CMOs about strategy, and the way they said it, exact quote is, our sales team is talking to the people with Excel spreadsheets, and we want them to move up the ladder. And so I prepared a presentation, went in and talked to the sales team, drove to the Silicon Valley area from my home in San Francisco, and I stand up on stage and wait for the team to filter into the room. And as they do, I'm looking around, and there is not a person over 35 or 40 years old in the room, and it's hundreds of people. And so I gave my presentation. I hope that everyone who saw that found it was insightful and helpful, as I always try to be. But afterwards, I said, your problem is that if you're going to talk to CMOs, you got to think about the person you put in front of them. If you're going to talk strategy, they want to see somebody who they have trust can speak strategy. And I don't mean to be ageist here. I think young people can do that very well, but I think it takes a mix of people. And if the only people that you can bring in to speak to in CMO are going to be in their 20s, I think maybe you got a problem, and that you won't be able to bridge that gap. I'm not saying that everyone's got to be old. I have worked in agencies. I love youthful and innovative ideas. To me, it's about mix. And I looked in that audience. I saw no mix. But I do think you're right. There's something to be said for making mistakes and learning your way up. I was a community manager back in the early 90s on Prodigy. Made plenty of mistakes on how to engage and manage a community, and learned about it. Ended up writing about it at Forrester and leading teams that did community management at USAA. So I just think that the world of hard knocks is a very tough teacher, but a really valuable one.
I think that's very well said, and I do want to just clarify, or not clarify, but just mention that I reached out to Tom and invited him on the show, and he is welcome anytime to talk about what happened or to talk about anything that he wants to. I think tonality, going back to what you were saying about tonality, I still find that communicating in a text-based world is just fraught with ambiguity and all of these Pandora.
Especially at 280 characters, right?
well, I mean, we could get into Twitter as well, and that will take us down another rabbit hole. That will take us back to the RNC watch party. But even text messaging or WhatsApp, where you have something like a read receipt, and now or the two blue check marks, and now you can be like, hey, you looked at my tweet, or I mean, you looked at my text. Why didn't you respond? And it could be like, well, I was on the plane and I had my phone in one hand. And so we get ourselves, I mean, if I could eradicate all forms of text-based communication in favor of, this to me, Augie, is the one good thing that's come out of this pandemic, is that we don't set up conference calls anymore. I just set up a Zoom call. I see you, you see me. See you, see me. Remember
Joe,
that?
I got to tell you, though, I love the written word. I truly love it. I love it.
Writing. I didn't say I don't like writing.
I love writing. I love the nuance it can convey. I love the depth. I love the scannability. I love copying and saving. Videos are great, but you can't always do that. It's funny. I would not do away with all forms of texting, but the thing we're really getting at is that we have to remember that these text-based forms of communication, particularly these social ones, these public ones, are still relatively new. It may feel like they've been with us forever, but Twitter's been around for what, 13, 14 years? Before that, I mean, maybe we could dip our toe into the Friendster waters, those sorts of things, but this is pretty new, and we humans have to learn to change the way that we approach things. I think that's, in the same way we talked about maturity and gray hair and hard knocks, the world needs to learn how to approach this, which means, being a little less reactive to what you say or what you interpret. My least favorite thing that happens, and I'm glad it doesn't happen too often, is where I may take offense at something or I may respond to somebody, and they say, no, you misunderstood, I meant this, or you should have understood that. And I hate that. That means I didn't take the time to see the various ways they might have intended what they said. And that's just a form of maturing with this new powerful communication medium we have. We just got a long way to go as a race, as a humanity, to figuring out how to make all of this work for us, rather than to immediately think that we know what's in people's hearts and minds because we read one tweet of theirs.
So we're actually getting a bunch of interesting questions about the topic. We definitely went down other rabbit holes, but we're definitely going to get back to optimism. I am watching the time. David asks, why argue with strangers? And I'll mention Jan's as well, and then we can decide who wants to respond to whom. Jan said, do we really need to respond to every comment from everyone in our lives, much less on our social channel? So which one do you want to take first, that one or that one?
Well, let's try to do both. I'll say I try to respond to as many comments as I can. I'm in social media to be social. I would try not to argue with strangers. I will try to respond to and educate and find middle ground with strangers. I have long ago learned that if I am 2 or 3 tweets into a stream that is feeling increasingly contentious, that I have long past outlived the value of my time to continue to engage. And I think of myself as the king of saying, well, we'll have to agree to disagree here. There are times, again, I've been a community manager. Well, I'll say, I won't respond further. I'm sorry that we weren't able to find middle ground. If you continue to reach out to me, I'll simply ignore it. That's a sort of a last best opportunity to end something without it turning ugly. I rarely in my time have had to block anyone, but if I'm going to be out there sharing things for the world on Twitter, I feel an obligation to listen and respond to people, even strangers who may disagree. So I'd say don't argue with strangers, do respond. If it turns into an argument, realize that you're probably at a point where you need to disengage. But I do think it's important to respond as much as possible. Now, that doesn't mean I respond to every tweet or every LinkedIn comment, but I want to be seen as engaging. And that's just important to me, especially as somebody who's been in the social media and community management space.
And I think my adds to that, Augie, is number one is to reiterate what you said. Yeah, don't argue with strangers, but do talk to them, do respond, do engage with them, especially if if it's your tweet, if it's your communication in a public forum. How can you not expect a public response? In the public town square. The other part that's interesting is, I would say, yes, you should respond to each and everyone if you have the ability and the bandwidth to. I still, to this day, it's funny, I didn't expect this conversation to get almost in terms of a retroactive or a look back, but I'm glad we are. I still do not understand why companies, why brands, why celebrities don't take the time to respond to each and every comment. What are they afraid of? That the person might respond again, or that they might actually have a real conversation? I just don't get it.
I understand why celebrities don't. You're one person. I get that they have people who can help them, but in that case, are they really responding, or is their staff responding? Brands should. I don't understand why brands don't. Brands wouldn't not answer the phone. Right. I'm always amazed that we're this far into the social era and the brands still haven't figured out that they should acknowledge praise and they should respond to questions and they should, try to deal with complaints. There are brands that do a really remarkable job of this. I think, as an example, FedEx does a spectacular job of responding to every mention and trying to get people to move out of the public place and into a private channel, which of course is generally a good strategy. So yeah, I agree. As for celebrities, I'll tell you, I always feel a little sorry for sports stars. Everyone, the thing about sports, I'm not an enormous sports fan. I'm in Milwaukee and Wisconsin, which means I'm a Packer fan, which is great. But people really associate with their sports teams, and it becomes, contentious. And so when a sports star goes out on the court or the field and doesn't perform very well, I'm just amazed at the thousands of hateful things people will say. And so, I think celebrities have it rough in social media. I think it's impossible to, as a single human being, to engage that much. And so I get it from celebrities, and I think that they've got a particular challenge and there are unique strategies there. But I think it is relatively unforgivable that brands respond to as few as the tweets and posts and comments that are directed to them as they do.
It's funny, and I'm certainly, by the way, not responding to the disrespect or the hate or whatever, but I think from a customer experience standpoint, and they are, right? A fan is a customer. It's the positive. It's the, hey, can I have a shout out? It's my kid's birthday.
Oh, absolutely.
And by the way, if it actually isn't even them managing their own feed, then double it, triple it, quadruple it, have 10 times the amount of people just saying, shout out to little Bobby. I mean, we saw this kid, his name escapes me, who spoke at the DNC last night talking about his stutter. He
was amazing, wasn't he?
Some people believe he has been the highlight of the entire Democratic National Convention. But just even making a kid's life better, surprising and delighting a kid. We have these tools, we have these techniques, we have, we are like Walt Disney. We do have a wand in our hand, and we can make magic, and we choose not to.
Well, it is time consuming. I mean, I have had peers, including at Gartner and throughout my career, who, want to know my secret. How do you balance all this? How do you get work done and still engage throughout the day? And the simple answer is that my Twitter account and my LinkedIn account and my Facebook are open constantly. And if I get 2 minutes in between something, I take 2 minutes to see who's responded to something and to respond back to them. It's a commitment. It takes time, and not everyone is built for it. I do think extroverts may have a little bit of a leg up in wanting to have that much public access and engagement. But it is. I understand why people will. We talked earlier about creating your own persona, the one that works for you. Mine is not going to be right for many other people. But I also get why some people are more responsive than others, and I think it becomes really important to be true to what you want to be in social media.
So, Augie, one more question, and then I want to get into at least one, and we could also pull one of the topics into the Zoom after show. Yaku asks, is there something about social media of which you used to think something and then made a 180-degree turn and believe in the opposite? You mean besides social media itself?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I love that question. It's also very sensitive. I really expected Facebook as an organization, I'm going to steer into a very sensitive topic, to be truly committed to, real helpful engagement. If you've been a community manager, there are these bodies of thought around fake news and attacks and bullying, and one is leave it be, let it alone. Everyone's got the freedom to say whatever they want. But if you've ever been a community manager, you know that communities die when you don't manage them. I mean, they die in the real world when they are not managed. They die online when they are not managed. You have to have rules. You have to have enforcement. Otherwise, people who care to engage get scared out of it. We've certainly seen celebrities, we just talked about it, who've literally abandoned social media because they simply cannot take the abuse that they get. I really thought that Facebook was going to take a stronger stand in managing a healthy community and not be quite so laissez-faire. And I know that this is an ongoing debate, and some advertisers have taken a stand and pulled some money off of Facebook because they expect more effort to combat fake news. And I get the sensitivity of this, but I really thought I got where Facebook was going and what it stood for. And to be perfectly honest, that may be the thing that I've turned 180 degrees on. I'm looking for Facebook to demonstrate, or maybe I just never understood it. Maybe that was my misunderstanding of Facebook's mission. But as somebody who covered social media, lived in Silicon Valley, had visited Facebook several times, I've been in the room, not a small room, a large room with Mark Zuckerberg. He's never met me face to face. I really thought I got where Facebook was going, and maybe that's been my sort of biggest 180 degree.
By the way, I just put this on our screen, but today Antonio Lucio, Facebook's CMO, said he's stepping down. But that just broke today. So what that means and what the story is, or the story behind the story, I don't know. But I just thought that was interesting. All right, Mr. Augie Ray, let's get to one of the topics at the very minimum. I love this. I'm going to read it because, I'm going to give you the voice of God treatment, which means so you can't see that I'm reading, although I just, I showed you how I cheat. So this is what you wrote me. Contrary to the comment above about hope, positivity, and optimism, right? Exactly. In my personal and professional life, I argue there are risks and dangers with unfounded optimism. I see too many businesses and people taking unnecessary risks because they're optimistic they won't get sick, or optimistic that the worst of the pandemic is behind us. There is danger in unfounded optimism that people will make poor decisions. Now is a time for caution, not pessimism or negativity, but wariness, as in being wary, wariness, and alertness. So now you get to respond to the soliloquy and also to talk about this idea of unfounded optimism. And let's be honest and let's be clear, whether that is a direct reference or not, we've had a degree of success theater in terms of these White House briefing sessions. So we're seeing this unfounded optimism and the role that it's playing.
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, with you having Augie and Ray's behind you, I can tell a really quick story that just came to mind this morning. A restaurant opened in Milwaukee, where I live, 8 blocks from me. Interestingly enough, its name was Augie's, A-G-G-I-E, not Augie. But my wife and I, as I mentioned, urbanites, we want to support businesses. Thought it was bold to open in the middle of the pandemic, so we walked there. Now, we haven't been inside a bar or restaurant in 5 months. We've been going to the outside options. We are a little cautious and wary, and we supported them. Lovely trout spread, so delicious. We visited its second weekend. 3 days later, it closed. It was open for 2 weeks. They were optimistic, unfounded optimism, opening in a pandemic. And the thing is, we can say all the positive things we want to about it, but they invested money in a marketing campaign. They invested in inventory that went to waste. People quit their jobs to join this new restaurant. And as a result, lost their jobs and are out of work now. There are costs to unfounded optimism. Unfounded optimists drive to Sturgis and hang out in crowded bars. And we've already seen reports of, not of outbreaks just yet, we'll see what happens, but of positive people who tested positive after being in Sturgis. Unfounded optimism send kids to dorm rooms, and 7 or 8 days later, as we have seen in a couple of very large universities, they turn around and come back. And there are costs to that. There's costs to moving and costs to moving back. There's disruption. There's also the risk that somebody comes back from a dorm where maybe, arguably, they shouldn't have been, and they're now positive and they spread it. We have seen reports of children spreading COVID to their parents. And so what I like to do is use a metaphor here about optimism and pessimism, which is we are in a slow motion natural disaster. The people use the language of war with COVID. We're battling it. We're going to fight it. We're going to defeat it. War is the wrong metaphor to use. This is a natural disaster. Think of it as a flood. We are in a flood. It is global. It is nationwide. It is still rising. Right? We know it is still rising. We know what the data is. No one would stand in the middle of a flood and say that restaurant should be open. No one would stand in hip deep water at a school and say those schools should be open. And again, I sound like I'm arguing against these things. I'm really not. What I'm arguing for is a sense of pragmatism and realism of understanding what we face here. Still face in fall, still face in winter. God knows what 2021 will bring. I'm hopeful. I do have hope for that. But we have to realize that we are in a natural disaster. It doesn't care what we do. Floodwaters don't care what we do, right? Floodwaters will move around us and fill our home. We can maybe stave it off a flood with a few sandbags for a while. But if you've ever been in a real flood, you know that doesn't work in a serious flood. We're in a natural disaster. We have to make decisions with consideration of the implications in this natural disaster. And so I'm all for optimism, but I see a lot of optimism that is founded by the idea that I can go into that bar and the chances are I won't get it. Well, there's a very good dashboard right now that you can access. I can share the link on Twitter a little later that will show you what the chances are for a given group of people in your county, a given number of people, what the chances of at least one person having COVID are. And right now in this country, for a group of 25 people, there are parts of this country where it is 75% or more likely that someone in that room has COVID. Now, most of the nation is much lower, 10 or 20 or 30%. But think of a bar, think of a classroom, and if you're in a place where it's a 20% likely that somebody has COVID, do you really want to take a 1 in 5 chance? Now, being in that room doesn't mean you're going to get it either. So anyways, it's just my way of saying we have to reframe what we're going through and what we will go through moving forward so that we can make, I think, better pragmatic decisions. There is a way to balance business and brands and economy with the pandemic, but it is not to go racing back to reopening things as quickly as possible. It's to rethink how we need to conduct business, at least through this fall and winter and into spring, if not on a longer basis.
So I'm going to ask you to define the word founded optimism, the opposite of unfounded optimism. But before I do, I want to make a statement. I've had this very weird, almost like, I don't know, like a kind of like childish, like when you were young, the question was always, what superpower would you love, right? My superpower was always that I could eat whatever I want and not put on weight. That's what comes from being a fat boy, a little fat boy.
If you figure that one out, man, you'll be a millionaire.
Yeah. I mean, like some people wanted to fly and whatever, X-ray. But me, it was just about eating. But part of what I've been thinking about is being able to see the virus. If we could see it, if it was actually visible, if we had glasses that would, where we'd be able to like see it, so you could avoid it. So you could be like, oops, like there's a bit of virus, a few particles. And I guess the point is, I love the analogy of the flood, but I wonder if maybe what's making this so difficult for so many is the fact that it is invisible, it is unseen.
Undoubtedly. Right. Well, and so many people have been untouched. I mean, I have this objection to, and you don't hear it much anymore. You did back in spring. We're all in this together, but we know the data. We know that people's jobs have been impacted in a variety of ways that is not common. We know that Gartner has some free data, by the way, for those of you interested. We have a free dashboard that shows some of the consumer and culture data we gather about the concerns that people have during COVID. And we have it over time, and we have it so that you can break it down by gender or income group. And we know, for instance, that people in lower income groups are much more worried about their job and being able to make bill payments, while people in upper income groups are a little more worried about the economy in general and whether businesses near them stay open. And so, we know that we're not all in this together. We know it's uneven. And I really think it's important for us to have that in mind, because I'm sitting in my home relatively safe. I have a job I can do from home. My wife and I are healthy. I know people who are truly suffering, and I feel for them. And so we have to find a way to strike that balance.
So, Augie, we're going to spend the last 5 or 6 minutes talking about your home, about your other home, Gartner. But before we do, and by the way, please do share that resource. I would love to share that with the CoronaTV community. Maybe we'll even share it in the Zoom after show. We'll have time to find it. But Amy says there's also a 20% chance that that's a Rickroll link, referring to, I guess.
I have never Rickrolled anyone in my life.
But what is your definition then of founded optimism, of the opposite of, I mean, if it's unfounded optimism, is the opposite founded pessimism, or is there founded optimism?
I think of it as a 2x2 grid. There's founded and unfounded. There's pessimism and optimism. I think a lot of it simply has to do with why do you feel the way you do. Why do universities? I'm going to pick on universities here for a second. And again, I get that people may disagree, but why do universities think during a pandemic you can get people together in dorms and classrooms and that you won't have outbreaks? To me, I've been predicting this since spring. I have conversations with people in higher ed. I don't think many of the schools that reopen here in the past couple of weeks, the coming weeks, will be open by the time October comes. I think we're going to see outbreaks. I think people's attitudes are going to change, and I think students are going to be back home. I know that's difficult, and I'm sorry, but it's a flood. We do what we do in a flood. So to me, unfounded and founded is, why do you feel the way you do? Why do you think you can have people go back into a classroom? I don't know that many people can answer that. And a lot of times the answer is, we need that. And like I feel for universities, they've made enormous investments in physical facilities that are not being used during COVID. And we certainly recognize that some of the lasting implications, the new normal that may develop, could fundamentally change the economics of universities. Anyone who follows higher ed has seen lots of articles and blog posts about this. So I get the challenge, but if your reason for being optimistic is you just really, really want it, or you really, really need it. I need the revenue. I need to be open. We have to make this work. That's unfounded. If your reason for optimism is, we know what cases are in our area. We know the transmission and how it happens. We know we can open safely with outdoor spaces, right? That's founded optimism to me. And so I think we have to ask ourselves, as we try so hard to save jobs and the economy and to minimize the adverse impact to people, to ask, are we doing it just because we really, really want that to happen? Or do we have good, logical, pragmatic, data-based, fact-based reasons for thinking this is in fact a good idea?
Yeah, I mean, well said. And with that, we will segue into Gartner, because I think there's one thing that you said to me which really struck me, which is, you realize that right now Gartner and the role that you play in terms of providing data and intelligence and insights and research, that you're actually helping. This isn't just about customer service. This is about potentially providing a lifeline to a company, helping that company survive and thrive and pivot and navigate and recognizing the responsibility that you have in a corporate capacity to help not only another company, but the people that work for that company. I found that to be very uplifting and optimistic and quite powerful.
Yeah, well, in normal times, I feel like my role as a researcher and advisor, helps people with their careers. And it's one thing for me to walk away from an interaction with the client and think I've really helped their company, they're going to make more money or succeed more, and that makes me feel good. Personally, I get more from, I'm going to really help that person, that client, to succeed more. I'm going to help them to create more success. It's going to help their career. They're going to be able to achieve more. This is a big part of why I like leading people. It has to do with that the business impact is one thing, but the impact on lives is another for me. It just happens to be what really motivates me. And so in a normal period, I've said this to some of my peers. In a normal period, I think that I help people to sell a little more, right? I help people to do a little bit better job with customer experience and their discipline, and that's enough. That's great. But right now, the interactions I'm having with clients can save jobs, literally the jobs of the people I'm talking to, the jobs of the people who report to them. We have a very tough budget period ahead. I think marketers should expect some very, very difficult budget decisions as we move into Q4, if they're not already making those. And my job is to try to do what I can to have a very serious, both short-term and lasting impact on the lives of the people who trust Gartner and trust Augie Ray to help them make better decisions and to take better strategy.
I have a thought which I'll reserve for the after show about that. But before we give you the final word and talk about a few things that are coming up with respect to Gartner, we're going to play the stump the interview, the interviewee part, where I give you a quote and then you have to tell me who said this quote. I always like to look on the optimistic side of life. but I'm realistic enough to know that life is a complex matter. And if you don't know, I'm going to give you a clue.
I do not know.
The name of this person, believe it or not, was mentioned in this interview.
Huh. Well, I'll guess Walt Disney maybe, but I know a lot of Walt Disney quotes. I'm not familiar with that one, but that'll be my guess.
And the guess would have been correct.
Woo! I've learned a new Walt Disney quote.
So, but you needed the clue. You needed the clue.
I did need a clue.
Well, listen, Augie, this has been, I know I say this, and, I can hear Bob Farnham going, another great show, which, of course, has nothing to do with me and everything to do with
I think you've got to give yourself a little praise here. The way you set up your shows, the way you spark conversation, you're a great interviewer. I think you have been half of the stake of this show. So thank you so much for having me on.
I'll take 40% if you take 60%.
Fair enough.
Augie, always trying to meet in the middle. If you want to find out more about Gartner, a company that certainly should not be new to you, all you have to do is go to Gartner.com. Of course, you can follow Augie on Twitter. Augie, maybe you can post that link on Twitter to that resource, and then of course I will share it next week as well. There's one thing that I know you wanted to talk about before I just remind you. We're going to go to the Zoom after show in a minute or so, bit.ly/CoronaTV after show. But you have an event coming up, which I'm putting on the screen. You might have to just raise yourself a bit so that you don't, it's a long URL, but want to talk a little bit about the virtual Gartner Marketing Symposium?
Thank you. We've got, like everyone, we had a physical symposium that has always been popular, has been growing year after year, and we had it scheduled in May in San Diego. In February, when I told some of my peers that I didn't think we'd be able to have it, they thought I was absolutely insane. We couldn't. And so that's been scheduled for December. We're going virtual. We plan a very tight conference. I know lots of people are attending virtual things these days. What I'd like to do is make a small pitch for the fact that, first of all, we're really carefully planning this. We're not going with long sessions. We're shortening them to a half hour so that they are hopefully very tight and exciting. Also, we have just an enormous range of really good speakers and experts on various topics of marketing. As you probably know of Gartner, we hire people who've been there and done that on the client side. And so we've got former CMOs and former data analysts and former customer experience experts and former social media people, and the whole gamut of anything that you'd be interested in, who have access to a great deal of research. And every year I go to this thing, I'm just amazed. I really, truly am amazed at how Gartner runs a great show, and I'm impressed by the content. So if you need yet another virtual conference, but I think one that might stand above, then you got the long URL there. You could just go and search for Gartner Marketing Symposium, and you'll find the page very easily.
That's great. And Amy said thank you. And we even got a little shout out from Mr. Michael Donnelly that said, always great to hear your perspectives. Thanks again. Have a great weekend.
Michael.
And all the best always. Always good to see his name popping up. Well, I guess that's it. We're going to head to the Zoom after show, and Monday night, 8:45 p.m. I'm already regretting the decision. RNC Watch Party Night 1 with a bunch of liberals, progressives, leaning Democrats, independents, never Trumpers. And quite frankly, if you love and support Donald Trump, this might not be the right place for you. But other than that, no, you can come too. Everyone is it. We're just going to have fun. We're going to have fun. Life is too short and life is too serious. But with that said, it's time to head on over to the after show. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye,
Take care, everybody.
Thank you for watching Corona TV with your host, multiple author and global keynote speaker, Joseph Jaffe. Corona TV is the show about hope, positivity, optimism, and if there's time left over, a little bit of marketing. The after show on Zoom starts right now at bit.ly/Corona TV After Show. If you like the show, tell a friend or two. Please subscribe to the show at coronatv.show. And if you want to get inside news, previews of upcoming guests, and much more, text Corona TV to 66866 or visit josephjaffe.com/subscribe to sign up for the show's newsletter.
And despite the best ministrations of your wife, you still look ugly.